Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we invite your presence into our study here this morning. We are thankful for the light that you've been giving us each morning, sufficient for the day and sufficient for the feet. We ask, Lord, that we can walk on the path that you are setting before us, that we can be guided by your word, by your Spirit speaking to us. And we pray that you can help us in the struggles that we face. We ask, Lord, that as we open your word to look at the story of the flood once again, that you can help us to see clearly and that you can correct us from all error. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. Now we're just gonna begin where we were finishing yesterday, but with a little bit of a review. So what you see on your screen here is the cosmic line, and the flood is the empowerment of the first angel, or not the formalization of the first angel's message in the cosmic line. And so what we have done is we've basically expanded this waymark here and seen that it is a reform line in and of itself, which is true of every waymark on a reform line, that it can have a reform line within it. Now, in trying to establish this, we're just using these standard arrival, formalization, and empowerment of each of the messages, except that the third angel's message only arrives. We don't see in a formalization or empowerment of it within that line. And one of the things about the cosmic line, and that I've argued with every reform line, is that a third angel's message arrives, or a third step arrives, but it never is empowered until our time. That is, each of these reform lines is part of this cosmic line, but a reform line can only bring you to an arrival of a third message. It requires this line, the cosmic line, to really ultimately empower that third angel's message. And that would be, and we're going to see when we get there how our line is tied in with that empowerment, even though our line is basically the Sunday law line. That's our history. This here is Millerite history. This here's the cross, right? So you can see that. Now, this sort of zooming in and zooming out can be a bit confusing. And we see a bit of confusion here. As we look at our line, we know that we also have, this is the period of 120 years, this line of the flood. So when we're looking at this line here, we know that it includes history from the time of Enoch. And that's what we haven't been able to really discern. How do we compare that to other lines? That is it possible that this line that we have here is 120 years is just part of the line of the flood, or is there's something else going on? Another thing that we noticed was the spans of time, which when we look up here, I'm just going to go for people to just switch screens here and stop the share, just for people to look at this. I don't have this drawn out on my computer yet, but you can see here we have these timelines, and instead of having a time of the end, that is the flood occurring, it occurs at the end of a time period, but the flood itself is not the time of the end. That is, the time of the end appears to be this time of the beginning of these time periods, which is like a mirror with the end. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but you can see that you got two different time prophecies, the time prophecy of Methuselah and the time prophecy of 120 years. But the preaching or the proclamation of the first message happens at the time of the beginning, so to speak, with the first message, that is, Noah's preaching. And according to the different studies that we looked at that this movement had done on the timeline of Noah, it's the work of the enemies that marks the arrival of the second angel, or the work of the second angel's message. And that's empowered when the animals come into the ark, and then the third angel arrives at the close of probation. But we also have this complicated chronology of the flood itself, which must be a reform line that addresses the Sunday law. That is, the flood itself is the Sunday law. And so that chronology that we have has all these symbols in it. And we need to understand that chronology of the flood itself, not just the chronology because we've worked through that, but what it means symbolically in the context of this reform line. And of course, the 7 days there is that 7 days that they're waiting in the ark. So the close of probation, sometimes we will put that there's a disappointment there. And so we would take the time that they're waiting in the ark as a disappointment, or the door closing being a disappointment. And that 7 days symbolizing the Sabbath, but it ends always when the third angel arrives. You have this 7. And then you have in the line above, with the line of Methuselah, there the 969 years, you have 622 a.m., which we found this symbol, 622 a.m., 622 BC, 622 AD are all a symbol, which brings us back to the story of the Passover of Josiah, which also ties us to June 22nd, Samuel Snow's third letter in Millerite history, and of course the June 22nds in our history, June 22nd, 2011, June 22nd, 2014, and then the center of the 777 chiasm, which is June 22nd, 2017. And we could even put there June 22nd, 2020 as a significant date, because that's the proclamation of the message of July 18th that went international on June 22nd. So we have all those June 22nds, which are 3 years apart. And 3 years is a symbol of 3 days. And 3 days is a symbol of the prediction before midnight, which of course we believe that July 18th is that prediction before midnight. So this 777 of Lamech being tied to this chronology with the 65, the 187, and the 252, which all symbolizes this message. And the five years we're going to look at a little bit more in the 777 in connection with our message, December 25th, and Trump and his inauguration, etc., which Stephen did some diagrams. We're going to look at those. And then the 120 years of Noah, you can see that both of those, the 696 or 969 and the 120, end in 1656. And from, Stephen will bring up some points here that he has noticed in regard of the connection of the flood to other histories. And then we have, I think that's it there. So I'm going to leave that part alone for now. Some of the other thoughts I have in mind. So when we go back to the diagrams here on PowerPoint, we can see that there's still lots of things we have to sort out. The cosmic line that we have there is a tentative line, but we would have to argue that the flood must be the formalization of the first message, which is the message that's given to Adam and Eve in the garden in Genesis 3:15. And it's about sin, right? Adam and Eve have sinned. There's this gospel promise. you have the seed of the woman promise, and you have, if you're going to look at the cosmic line, there has to be a formalization of that message, and that would be the flood. And the increase of knowledge we saw was this progressive destruction of four. It's the increase of the knowledge of sin, the results of Adam and Eve's sin being seen worked out, and both in God's typical judgment, even though this is a literal judgment against sin, it's typical of the end of the world. So the flood is typifying God making a new heaven and a new earth over here at the end. So we can see how this is all this warning message of this cosmic line. It's a progressive message that God has been doing throughout history ever since the origin of sin in the universe, which began with Satan, and in the end he will be dealt with. So when we take this story of the flood, then this is just zooming this out as we saw, but we could argue then that each of these waymarks has a reform line attached to it. And maybe what we're seeing in the chronology, both of the flood and of the chronology of, Enoch and Methuselah and Lamech, that they're part of a structure that is referencing this, that is, it's expanding this waymark, where the flood itself is expanding this waymark. Any thoughts on that? Okay, somebody typed something, so. Okay, so the significance of the patriarchs' names. So we know that we have a message, that is, we can take the names of the patriarchs and it gives a message about the gospel, basically, the everlasting gospel. I can't remember the names, what they all meant and how they're put together in a sentence, but Louis F. Weir does a study on that, which I remember. At least I think it was Louis F. Weir. But I've seen it a number of other places. So I can't remember if he's the one who originated it or if it's just some old list of interpreting the names. I don't know if anybody has quick access to that or not. So what we want to look at then is the flood itself. And we're going to go to, because we looked a little bit at the ages of the patriarchs, but we're going to come back to that. But I just want to look at the flood line itself. So so here's our list, our chronology. Now we had looked at this, and we have all of these structures, right? So we have the chiasm, the 2 periods of 150 days. So from the time that the rains had stopped until they took the roof off the ark is a period of 300 days divided into 2 periods of 150 days. And all these counts are inclusive, that we're not counting cardinally, we're counting inclusively. So we're including the first day as a count as day 1, not day 0. And we can see that we have, and somebody had asked me about the 40 days at the beginning from the first day of the first month to the closing of the door, which I argue is simply it's an artifact of the chronology. That is, it's not mentioned specifically. It just happens to be that way. And so they asked the significance of that. But we talked a bit about it the other day, all these different periods of 40 days and 40 years. So there's lots of these symbols and they can mean various things, but they are a symbol of something, so in different times they can symbolize different things, but they do just at least symbolize part of a structure or of a divine pattern. So they're just not arbitrary periods of 40 days. And then the 2 periods of 7 days at the beginning. Now, in trying to understand all of these periods, one is we have the supposed 220 days, which is what most people look at. And we can see that can't possibly be 220 days. That is from the 17th day of the 7th month to the 27th day of the 2nd month. In this period of time, in this chronology that we have, even if we were to take this as 30-day months, and we were doing it as a cardinal count, the problem that we would have here, and there's various problems, but one is this is a long year. That is, it's a leap year. But of course, if you had 30-day months, you would probably say there was no leap years, and so you could argue that. But it doesn't fit in with the spans of time that are given in Genesis. So you're going to have a lot of problems trying to fit in 220 days there, from the 17th day of the 7th month to the 27th day of the 2nd month. You would have to say that there is no leap year, and you would have to ignore the 150 days of the waters abating. So what about these? And to me, I still think it's significant that there is the 220 days, even if it's not literal. As a symbol, we could argue that it's 220 days. And we could even argue that the 150 days. But the Bible doesn't give us the 150 days. I mean, people assume that. But if it's 150 days, when it talks about the 150 days of the waters prevailing, they're going to count it from, they're going to include in there the 40 days, right? And it's pretty clear that the water prevailing does not include the 40 days. So again, that's another problem. And the fact that this fits so perfectly with the year 2390 BC, starting in the fall of 2391 BC, and that we could get everything to work out in such a precise manner would argue for this chronology. But we still have all of these symbols. So even in spite of the fact that people had used a wrong chronology, they still had recognized a period of 220 days. And of course, they accepted the period of 150 days. Now, what is it that these represent? What's being represented here by these 150 days and these 220 days?
Well, the 150 days,
Yeah.
To me, that reminds me of Revelation chapter 9.
Right. So we got
2 periods
of 5 months.
2 periods, 150 years. Yes.
Yeah. So the 5 months of Revelation 9. So we can see here that in this story of the flood, it's tying us to symbols that connect to our history, to Millerite history and to our history. Now, what would be the significance of the doubling of the 150 days?
Well, it could connect to the midnight cry, the second angel's message.
Yeah, so it connects to the second angel's message, right? Now we can also see so we're kind of jumping around a bit, but the 22 days from the day that the raven is sent out, including that day, until when the dove is finally sent out but returns no more. It's a period of 3 weeks, but it's a 22-day inclusive count. It's also a 3-1 combination, starting with the raven first and then 3 doves. And what do those symbols mean? So first off, you got 3 weeks, 777. Does that have any significance?
Well, we have also 777 years or days.
Right. Yeah. So we can see the fact that there's 3 weeks in a row is 777, and that becomes a symbol that exists in our history as well. I probably could have put 777 there in those to show those weeks, but that's what's there. And we also have 2 periods of 7/7 at the beginning, right? The 7 days and the 7 days. So is 77 related to 777?
Well, I think it's natural to see some connection there to them.
Yeah, and when we look at some of our other lines, we've noticed it many times. For instance, in the story of Joseph, we have 2 periods of 7 years, and then we also have it in the story of Jacob, and Jacob is 77 when he begins working for Laban, and then works 7 years and then 7 years. So we can see that that's a symbol. We also have in the story of Joseph, remember there's the 11 years or 17 years and then 11 years, and then 11 years and 17 years. 11 times 17 is 187. And we also have this really odd coincidence where if we take the number, so if we take it as a 1117, so 11 and 17, and you take that as a number, it's the 187th prime number. So we get all these symbols. 11 times 17 is 187, but also 1117 is the 187th prime. So we have all of these symbols that exist in connection with 7/7 and with the story of Joseph. And we see those symbols repeated here in the story of the flood. Well, I guess the story of Joseph would be taking these symbols from the story of the flood and applying them, because this is first. We also see the symbol of the first day of the first month. So even though it's referred to here in this chronology as the first day of the first month, it's the first day of the first month in Noah's 601st year. Now, there was some other things dealing with the flood and its connection to the Exodus, which we're going to look at in more detail. But from the flood to the birth of Moses, it's 777 years, Stephen. Is that the number you said?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Now you had a diagram of that as well. So there was some diagrams dealing with that. Oh, and that was the other question I had for you. Now, we know that how old was, so we'll go back to this other one. So when we go here to just to the age of Noah, how many years is it? How old is Noah when the 120 years begins?
I think 480.
Yeah, so he's 480. Now, what's the significance of 480, Stephen?
That would be from the coming out of Egypt to the building of the Temple of Solomon.
Yeah, so the laying of the foundation of the temple. Now, we have that 480 show up other places, and it has some other symbolic connection that I can't remember, that you'd done some charts with, but I don't remember how it worked. Was there some?
Yeah, I think we have the number 5.25. You know, you have a 360-day year, and then you have a 365.25 day solar year.
Okay.
Okay, so if you take away that 5.25 from the 365.25, just to make it the 360,
Yeah.
multiply out 5.25 by 480, it gives you 2520.
Okay, so that was it. Yeah. So I don't know if people followed what Stephen was saying there, but I'll put it on the. So the number 480 becomes significant because it's connected to a 2520. So just to clear this here. So we know that there's a prophetic year is 360 days, and a Julian year is 365.25. So if you take 365.25 and you subtract 360, you get this 5.25. Now 5.25 or 525 is a portion of 777. That is, we know that if we take the 777 days in our line from November 9th to December 25th, the natural division is the 252 and the 525 days. So the fact that we have this 5.25 is interesting. Now, what was the reason that you multiplied it by 480? So we multiply it by 480, we get 2520. Was it that you had divided 480 or 2520 by 480 and came up with this number 5.25 and then thought about it as the difference between a prophetic and a solar year? Is that how you did it? How did you?
Yeah, I was doing something. I can't really remember how I found it out.
Yeah.
What I was doing at the time. Maybe it was just sort of seeing the difference in days between a solar and a prophetic year of that time period.
Yeah. Because I had taken 2520 and I think I had divided it by 525 before. So I'd taken this and divided it by 525 and got 4.8. At least I remember doing that, but I never connected it with, the number of the years because I hadn't looked at 480. But the 480 is an important symbol as well. Now, so that's how old Noah is when the prophecy is given regarding the 120 years. So that's the point of that. So that's significant. Now we know he's going to be 600 years old when the flood begins, and he's going to be 500 years old when Japheth is born. And Shem's going to be born 2 years later. So he's going to be 502 when Shem is born. Right? So we're assuming Ham is the youngest one, that he would be born after.
And 502 times 360 is 180,720.
Okay, so I was wondering if you're gonna say anything. So 502 times 360 is 180720. So that's 180,720. But that is related to the symbol of July 18, 2020. That is, you could take it as 18 day, 07 being the 7th month, and 20 being the year. So just to show the
It's
calculation.
also, it's also the total number of years the patriarchs lived, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay, so explain that again. So the total number of years that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived is 502?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And that's probably where you had done that calculation originally. Is that where you first did that calculation?
No. The first time it was Shem. Or no, with the birth of Shem, with Noah's age, I think was the first.
Okay.
And then I realized that you can apply it to the
Okay.
patriarchs.
Okay. So you've first done it with Shem. Okay. So interesting there.
Yeah, and Shem lived 502 years after the birth of Arphaxad.
Okay.
So Shem is 98 years old, I think, when Arphaxad.
Yeah.
Or there's something there. I can't remember. Yeah.
Okay.
Or after
So Shem is 98 when the flood happens, and he has Arphaxad when he's 100, 2 years after the flood.
I'm actually wrong there. So it'd be, he lives 502 years after the flood.
After the flood.
Shem does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that's an interesting number. So Shem is born to Noah when Noah is 502. And then there's going to be 98 years to the flood. And then Shem is going to live 502 years after the flood. So that gives us a mirror. Now, what's the significance of the number 98? Should be obvious to everyone.
1798.
Well, how about 2 times 49?
Yeah, okay.
So 2 Jubilee cycles, right? So that's what I always think about with the number 98. This is just 49 plus 49. So it's a doubling of a Jubilee. So we can see that there's a bunch of representations of numbers in this story of the flood, both in the age of the patriarchs, in these spans of time that connect things, and also in the story of the flood itself. So we go back to this diagram, and we have all of these symbols, but we haven't placed these on a line. That is, what is being represented here in this chronology of the flood? Because we have the close of probation, which is the arrival of the third angel, and then we have this chronology of the flood, and to me, it's, as I've said, it's a very fascinating chronology because it ties in so many different things, and it gives us the first, from a chronologist point of view, dated event, that it's dated to a calendar. So it's the first time we see a calendar being used in the Bible in a specific way like this, and it's very precise. And the other thing about it, just when it comes to the skeptics, and they take the story of the flood, they sort of, it's this mishmash of traditions that just happens to be put together much later, so that it's some old tradition that was put together, maybe during the time of Ezra, maybe earlier. They have all different kinds of theories about when it was finally stitched together in the form that we have today. So that's modern critical scholarship. But we have this very precise dating, and the fact that I've been able to take those dates and those spans of time and make sense of them in the real world, that as I've been able to attach this to the chronology of when I believe the flood occurred, and then to attach it in this very specific way to these spans of time, looking at them differently than anyone ever has. That is, we don't have people interpreting this on a literal biblical calendar, trying to find out the days of the week and putting together all these chronologies so they fit. People just look at it in a surface way. But now we've put it together in this way. We have this strong witness that this is real history, that this isn't some story that's just manufactured. And to me, it would always be amazing that it would be. That is, when you look at the dates that are given in the story of the flood, they're not the dates that you would expect if somebody was just trying to do this story in a symbolic way, right? I mean, somebody could argue the 7 days and the 40 days, those are typical symbols. But the 150 days isn't. And definitely the dates, what the dates that are given there, the 10th day of the second month, the 17th day of the second month, the first day of the 10th month, they're not really particularly dates that we can find other places in scripture and just say, oh, here is why they use those dates. They would have used much more symbolic dates, that obviously symbolic. And so there's nothing contrived about the chronology of the flood. I mean, one is it's realistic, but it's realistic in a way that doesn't appear to be as symbolic. That is, you don't see the structure until you do the work that we've done here in laying it out. Right? So now it becomes much more significant once we look at it. And I understand why people would assume that the period of 150 days that the water prevails on the earth, they just assume, well, that must be from the 17th day of the second month to the 17th day of the seventh month, because that's 150 days if you just take a 30-day month. But the question is, why would we have a 30-day month when 30-day months don't exist? I mean, they exist every second month, but you wouldn't have 5 30-day months in a row. So to me, that's one of the things about working on this chronology that has been fascinating, is that only at the end of the world do we have the ability to reconstruct the chronology of the Bible. That is, people in the past didn't have the tools that we have, and they didn't understand the calendars, or especially recently. But even back then, they wouldn't have been able to know exactly what year the flood occurred, and they wouldn't have a computer program to look at, like we did the other day, all of these full moons, and to discern exactly when the full moon was for each month. Or even if you wanted to do the new moon, you wouldn't have had the technology to do that. Whether Moses would have or not, I don't know. How much mathematical knowledge he would have had to be able to calculate when this was, but he just wrote down what God gave him. Now somebody asked me another question, so this is just related to this chronology. The question was something to the effect of how Noah knew what date it was. that, he must have had some kind of timepiece. Well, he would have seen the day and night, so he would have known he would have been able to count the days. But, the question is, would he have the ability to see the moon? Or would he have just known in advance, based upon mathematics, which month was going to have 30 days and which was going to have 29 days? You understand what I'm saying here? And I would say that Noah would have had the mathematical knowledge to know what the pattern was of the months. That is, they follow a specific pattern. And if you've known what they were in the past, which I'm sure Noah would have had the capability to remember the past, he would have lived through a period of 391 years, for instance. And a period of 391 years is a cycle of the ecliptic. That is, he could just know from the past the dating and known where he is within that cycle. Now, we probably wouldn't have that ability to remember a period of 391 years every year and how many days in the month there were, which months had 29 days and which had 30. But Noah would have had that mental capability to remember that. So he wouldn't need to see the sun. He would just have to have known the past and where he is in the cycle of the months. Does that make sense to people? I mean, we need a computer program to do that now. But Noah just needed his memory. Any comments on that? Okay, Jeff, you have a comment? You turned your mic on there, but I don't hear you speaking.
Well, Moses was educated in Egypt, so he knew mathematics.
Yeah, but this is Noah, right? So Noah is the one who's going to.
I meant Noah.
Yeah. So Moses would have had mathematics, but here we have Noah. He's got, because we did talk about Moses. So Moses is writing this down, but how he knows these dates, the question is this just part of the story that had been passed down? And so he knows these dates from the story in these spans of time. And with God's inspiration, he writes this story, but it still would be a story that he's recounting that has been passed on through time. And it's pretty clear that the story of Genesis has characteristics of a memorized story, that it has a type of structure that you would use in stories that are oral traditions. And we think that oral traditions are unreliable, and that's actually not the case. They can be extremely reliable ways of remembering things. That is, they have a certain sort of structure to them that aids a person in reciting them word for word. So, but how Moses wrote this, what information he had from the past, and what information was by inspiration given at the moment, we don't know. But we do know it is an inspired story and that it's accurate. But it's just, people ask these questions like, well, how did he keep track of time? Well, I have one of these really minor superpowers. That is, I have an internal clock that's very accurate. That is, I always know what time it is. Sometimes I can be off by, 20 minutes, but I can be pretty accurate. And I would assume that Noah would have had a very accurate sense of time. These would be things that people would have had, especially in the past, when they would observe the sky for keeping track of time and not having a clock to depend upon. So they would have a sense of how long things are since how long things have been happening.
Their memory was superior to ours.
Yeah. So they would have had any of the abilities that we sometimes look at as existing within a savant, for instance, nowadays. Like there are some people, and they have autism. But I know one guy in particular that I've seen, and you can ask him any date in the past, and he can tell you what day of the week it was. Right? So you just give him a date, 1 year, it can be any date, and he'll tell you what day of the week it was. And it's just an innate ability he has to do that. And if it's something that's in his life, he can tell you what the weather was like that day. So he has a complete memory of every day that he's lived. And there's other people like that who have these really detailed memories of everything that's ever happened to them. And they find it actually a huge burden to have to deal with that information. So I would say, though, that people in the past would have been savants on all different kinds of level. They would have, a photographic memory, an auditory memory, very good.
Is this a speculation?
Is it a speculation?
Yeah, I'm just messing with you at this point.
It's not a speculation. We know that they were more intelligent than we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that we all have a somewhat of a capability of accessing all of these things that you talk about, our daily lives and whatnot. And it's just about I caught you saying earlier about it's not, it's unpleasant to remember some of these things, so I would suggest that we actually turn away from that. We teach ourselves how to not think.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to memory, so my mom, who passed away a few weeks ago, she had memorized thousands of poems. So it was, I can't remember, it was something like 8 hours of poetry. Now, and that's quite remarkable. And if you've ever tried to memorize something. But my mom started that when she was a child because she couldn't read well. She was dyslexic. So she would memorize every reading that she had to do in school. In case the teacher asked her to read something from what they were studying, she would have it memorized so that she could read it. Now, my two oldest sons also have that same ability. They started memorizing the Bible and Bible story tapes when they were very young, like 3-4 years old. And they both retain that ability to read something and remember it word for word. And I asked my one son about it because he had read a book and he could recite the entire book. And I said, well, how'd you do that? Well, he said, I read it 25 times. But even if he reads something once, he's going to remember large passages. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he says, it's practice. So we just often don't practice these skills. So we don't have them. And that is, we're generally quite lazy. At least I can say
agree
myself. But like when it comes to all this chronology and all the dates and numbers I remember, it's mostly just a lot of work, but you're sort of forced into it to have to do it in order to present. So some people say, well, that's pretty amazing. But if they'd spent as much time working at it, they would have the same ability. And same with numbers. I mean, you could say I have a natural ability with numbers, but it's from lots of practice when I was a kid. So I would practice, for instance, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing in my head. And I would practice adding numbers together, long lists of numbers, doing it in my head, not writing it down. So it's just practice. If I'd never done that, I wouldn't have had that ability. So anyway, to get back to this, we can see that this chronology, it's remarkable in its exactitude, but also in the fact that these symbols are discerned by deep study. That is, to put this together wasn't something that was done by superficial reading. and that shows its veracity. It's a testimony of the fact that this is real history, not something that was just pieced together from a bunch of different stories and traditions. So
You mined this information.
Yeah,
You mined it.
yeah, we had to dig for it, right?
That's right. And it's oftentimes tough. I've worked in a mine before.
Okay. So now we have all of these symbols, and I want to go to our history a little bit. So we can see. I'm going to go back to this, and just and Stephen had brought this up, and Heidi had mentioned it yesterday again.
What was the 150 on the bottom of that chart?
Well, the 150 is the assumed 150 days. That is
The dotted
assumed,
line, the dotted line at the bottom.
yeah. So the dotted lines were if you had 30-day months, and
Oh, I got you.
and you counted cardinally, and that's how we would normally see it. We would say from the time that the rains began until they came to the mountains of Ararat, that would be a period of 150 days. But we saw that the mountains did not appear until the first day of the 10th month, which is like 70, what was it, 73 days later or something like that. And so obviously the waters were still prevailing, for that period of time, at least partly. So the idea is that when they rested on the mountains of Ararat, it actually means rested amongst the mountains of Ararat. So the ark had come to be floating above the mountaintops, because the tops of the mountains weren't seen, for over 2 months later. So obviously the waters were still prevailing at that time. So the waters began to be assuaged 150 days after the rains had begun, and that's when there's no more water being added to maintain the water levels, and so they begin to assuage. However that happens technically, I don't know, but and then it says that the waters are abating for 150 days, and so we could put that together as a period of 300 days, and so that was that part of it. So yeah, we know it fits. What we have fits. But if you take the 30-day month, it doesn't fit. You can't fit the story into a 360-day year. It's a 385-day year. Now, so here we're looking at the cosmic line. This is the story of the flood that we had. And I'm trying to see which is, okay, that was Miller's line. Okay, our line. Okay, that's what I wanted to look at. Now, Stephen had brought up the candlestick. And so the idea of the candlestick is that there is these branches. There's 6 branches. The center candlestick, which if we're looking at the cosmic line, this is the cross. This would be the center of the 7 lamps. But it's how they're joined together.
I see it.
Yeah. So you can see that you would have this curve going underneath. And that means that 1 and 7 are connected, 2 and 6 are connected, 3 and 5 are connected, and the center is 4, right? So that's how the candlestick works. And so we can see that we take these waymarks, these 7 waymarks, and we compare them to the branched candlestick, 7-branch candlestick. We can see how that fits, right? So the center branch is the one that we would mark as the cross, and the 3 branches on either side. Now,
Interesting pickup on that.
right. So we can see that the flood compares to the Sunday law, literal Israel to spiritual Israel, creation of heaven and earth to the new heaven and earth, right? So there's that aspect of it. Now we could also see that the story of the flood mirrors the story of the Sunday law, which is our history in all of these different symbols. but also these spans of time that are sort of reversed. That is, instead of having a time prophecy and then the time of the end and then the reform line, you actually have the reform line end when the time periods end, which is the opposite of what we have. And even when we start to look at literal Israel and all of the time prophecies in here, we'll start to see that there is this connection between literal Israel and spiritual Israel that is typically where we talk about the time prophecies themselves. So all of our time prophecies begin with literal Israel and end with spiritual Israel. So that's those two center between the flood and the Sunday law. So I guess on the left and the right of the cross, this literal and spiritual. Now this reminds me a little bit of this history here. This is Snow's line, right? So this is Snow's personal line, and I don't know. I have this all down here. What is that at the bottom? That's just this. I don't know. Message in relation to time. I have no idea what that line is below there, but let's look at this. Now in Snow's line, we can see that the arrival of the second angel is April 19th. Now, whether this is the correct way to look at it or not, maybe I wouldn't even put February 22nd there. I might do this some other way. I don't know. But the point is you have these mirrors. January 1st is the time of the end for Snow. That's when he begins to proclaim this message. And he finally proclaims it at Boston on July 21st. Now, I put here it's the arrival of the third angel's message. Well, obviously, it's not the third angel's message. It's the second angel's message being empowered. On the bigger line of the Millerites. But within Snow's own line, it is the arrival of the third angel's message. That is, this history here, we're saying to July 18th and to July 21st is the period of, well, I see what that is. That's this here. That's what this is. This was this line. I'm just going to go here. So we said July 18th to December 25th was this period of 3 days. I don't know what happened to the line and I might have just moved this down from there. That's what I did. And this was just a tentative sort of thought experiment that was written out. So that's why this 3 days here becomes significant. It's this symbol of from July 18th to December 25th. So we have this line. Snow's line is a line within what we would call the second angel's message, because his line is about the second angel's message. But he has a personal reform line. Has to do with his proclamation of the message. Now, we could even say that in some ways this is about the formalization of the message, because Snow's line, if we're gonna take it, it could be the formalization of the second angel's message. It also does address the arrival of the second angel's message. So I'm not explaining this well. Let me think. So remember when we zoom into a line. So if we zoom into Millerite history, we know we have an arrival of the first angel's message, and we had done a formalization of, and that was Miller's line, right? So Miller's line, if you take Millerite history, this line here is all what we would call 1833, right? So we put 1833 as the formalization of the first angel's message. But Miller's line here was just zooming into that one-way mark, expanding it out as a reform line, and realizing that it was a reform line that started in 1798 and ended in 1833. But it's really just one-way mark. It's just the formalization of the message. It's the formalization of Miller, the message, and the messenger. And we could see when we compared it to our line that we also have this doubling of 9/11. So when we look at our line and when we look at any line, we can say that that line is a zoom in to the cosmic line in one way or another. That is, it could be zooming into a single waymark on the cosmic line, or it could be zooming into a waymark that exists from a zoom into a waymark on the cosmic line. Because our line is a zoom into the cosmic line, right? So is Millerite history. But when we talk about our line, this line here, right? We also have a line within this line, which is this movement. That is, this line here is not this movement. This is what we call the big line. Snow's waymark, his line is a zoom in onto a waymark on the Millerite line, just as Miller's line is a zoom into a waymark on the Millerite line. So is that clear? Anybody having problems with what I'm saying? I can illustrate it if you want me to on the whiteboard.
I think that might help a little.
Okay. So I know this is, we're going over this quite a bit, but in order to understand the flood, I think we really need to see what those lines are. And when we see them as a zoom in, to recognize how they parallel the different zoom ins that occur in our line. And the question is, how many zoom ins can you do? Maybe on some lines you can do more than others. Some waymarks have many different levels. And they can work down to the personal level, at least of the level of the individual. And maybe even within an individual's life, he can have his life be a line, but he might have certain events in his life also being a line. Because in his line, if in his life he has all these waymarks, he might be able to zoom into each of those waymarks in his personal line and find another line that is a three-step testing prophetic message that's going to either decide where he decides for God or against God, that he makes a choice. And so we can see then how all of the individuals that exist and all of the choices that they make are all part of the cosmic conflict. That is, every decision that we make every day is part of this huge line of the great controversy. Can we see that?
Yeah, I can see that.
And then we can see the weight that exists in the decisions that we make, that the decisions that we take as trifling decisions each day are not trifling decisions. They're serious matters. And if we can get that perspective, a correct perspective also with an understanding of who God is, that he loves us and cares for us, and that he's not, seeking to find us harm, that we can participate with God in this battle against Satan by the choices that we make each day. So, but anyway, that's a little bit deeper than I wanted to get on this, but I'll go to the whiteboard.
It is appreciated, though.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I gotta change my microphone. So, and can you hear me well with this microphone on?
Yes.
Okay, good.
It's a little tinny, but yes.
Yeah, but it's louder than when I have the other microphone on, I think. Yeah, it's just, this is the microphone on the camera right in front of me, and you're getting it directed off of this. So we have our waymarks. So I'm gonna put here 1989, 1996, 9/11, 9/11. And what am I gonna put here?
You have the Sunday law.
Okay, so we're gonna have the Sunday law and the loud cry, right? So this is the big line of our history. And this here is a repeat of Millerite history, correct?
Yes.
So this is the first and second angel's messages. That's the parable of the 10 virgins. Okay. Now, I'm going to put above here 1798, 1833, August 11th, 1840, April 19th, 1844. Now, if we just take Millerite history itself, this is October 22, 1844. And this would have to be July 21st, and this would have to be August 15th. Correct? So I guess I would do this
That looks correct.
in our history, but in Millerite history, we would do this. So we can see just by looking at our history, this repeat, that it's repeating up to this history. That it's not repeating up to this history. So this must be a zoom in. This repeat of history, of Millerite history, is actually a zoom in, as we've said, to the Sunday law. So if we're taking Ellen White's line, this is the Sunday law, right? And this is the close of probation. So I guess I got 3 lines here. I don't know how I do that. But if we look at Ellen White's history, then I'll put down here. This is the close of probation. And then she's going to have 1798. She's going to have the first and second angel's messages. So I'm just going to put the arrival of the third angel's message. Oh, this is, I guess, here's what I have to do. I need to extend my board over here. So I'll do it this way. So this is the close of probation here. And we have the Sunday law and the loud cry. So Ellen White's going to look at these in the context of 1798. I don't know how to do this properly. Maybe I'll get rid of this. Do it up here. So Ellen White's line looks more like this. Close of probation, loud cry, Sunday law, and that's going to happen after. So this is the first and second angel's messages. So this is Millerite history. She comes to October 22nd, 1844, but she puts the Sunday law. Can you see that there? Sorry about that.
You have the second angel arrive in the bottom, different from the top. So you have the bottom, the 2 coming in at August 11th.
Yeah, I understand that. So that's because, yeah, I'm taking this as 9/11. So you're saying I should do this? I should have the first angel repeated here, but
Yes.
this
Or-
9/11 11 is the same waymark. So in our history, how's this?
Right, okay.
Right, so it's the same waymark. But yeah, so we see the Sunday law, the close of probation. This is the period of time from October 22 to the Sunday law. That's what Ellen White sees. So this is her line of the Millerites, and it's going to end with the close of probation here. So this is the whole Seventh-day Adventist line, including the Millerites. But we can see that we have this repeat of history, which is all this waymark on Ellen White's line expanded out as a reform line. That's all I'm trying to illustrate here. But that our history is an expansion of this waymark here, this reform line. And so this Sunday law here, so this is Millerite history, this is our history. This Sunday law here is this waymark, and this is this expansion of this waymark. But we also have a loud cry and a close of probation that follows. But this movement is, on this line, is an expansion of one of these waymarks. That is, this movement, at least we have to say, what has happened in connection with November 9th and July 18th is an expansion of something here in this history. That is, we've zoomed in to our line, which parallels Millerite history, but we're illustrating something that is a fractal. That's what a fractal is. Now, we broke up fractals in the wrong way because we said it was a three-step testing prophetic message, but we just tried to put it into each of these. We tried 1, 2, 3, and we had the right idea, but we didn't have the right visualization of what was happening. And so then we ended up with these 3 different lines: priests, Levites, Nethinim, and the 144,000. Actually, we had 4 lines, but they didn't make any sense. They just created confusion for people because they were confusing. I mean, they weren't correct. So if we're going to say that our movement is paralleling Millerite history, what we would want to know is Samuel Snow's letters. We would say that Samuel Snow's letters are an expansion of this waymark. Would we agree with that?
It sounds logical.
And that this movement is paralleling this history up to December 25th. That is, this is an expansion of this waymark, but for Samuel Snow, it exists after 9/11 and before July 21st, as far as the letters themselves. But this 3 days is still part of Samuel Snow, right? Because he's going to be here at Boston. But the letters themselves, this is what we have been experiencing. So we said July 18th lines up with July 18th. And the 3 days is from July 18th to December 25th. And we've had December 25th as a symbol of the Sunday law. And we can see that Stephen in his chart has expanded that out, that we have this other symbol that can extend past December 25th. And that it's connected to Trump. Is that what you were saying, Stephen, with that illustration of the 1800?
Yeah, that was maybe not predicting a particular time, but symbolically.
Right,
We're
symbolic.
saying, yes.
Okay. And now the next waymark here for Snow is Exeter. And Exeter is the empowerment of the second angel's message. So this is a formalization. This is an empowerment. This is the arrival, right? But we have the same symbol for the arrival and also for the formalization of the first message. And we saw this in Miller's line, where he had September 11th, 2014 and September 11th, 1814 and September 11th, 1816. And that was part of his formalization. That was the formalization of the first angel's message. So I don't want people to get confused, but I think we should be able to recognize what level we are in a reform line, in a waymark. If we have our cosmic line correctly, correctly laid out, then we should be able to recognize the major waymark that comes from an expansion of each of those waymarks, or the major reform line that comes from an expansion of the major waymarks. And then we should be able to know, when we're looking at a waymark in a reform line, what it is we're expanding out with another reform line. So this is going to help us as we begin to go through each of these waymarks, that we start to recognize that things that we saw as reform lines were actually an expansion of a waymark on a larger reform line. And if our structure of the cosmic reform line is correct, then we should have no problem recognizing each time we look at a reform line what it is. So we know Ezekiel, for instance, has his own personal reform line, but it's a waymark in a bigger reform line. Now we also have these progressive destructions of 4, but within a progressive destruction of 4, or whatever you want to call it, this progression of 4, of a falling away, a progressive falling away, that happens in a symbol we call 4 generations, that we also are having waymarks within those progressive destructions of 4. But they're not the major waymarks on the cosmic line. And so that's one of the things we have to decide about as we start to zoom in. So I think the story of Noah gives us some of that indication that we can do this, that the precedent has been set up right from the beginning, just like we did with the first waymark on the cosmic line. We could see that it applied to the story of the origin of sin. That is, we could take the first 3 chapters of Genesis and we can say that all of those 3 chapters are a reform line that exists within the first waymark, and that the creation of the world itself, the 7 days of creation, are actually zooming into that waymark, the first waymark, the arrival of the first angel's message, within the first reform line, but it is a reform line itself. So the creation of the world becomes the pattern, but it's actually just the first within another reform line that exists on the reform line of the cosmic line, right? So that is, we could say that all of this is not just this, that is, in this one we have a reform line, which would be the first 3 chapters of Genesis, but this reform line is just the first chapter of Genesis. And then even when you look at Genesis chapter 2, it's actually zooming into the empowerment of the second angel's message. That is, it's the creation of man. Man and animals are expanded on in Genesis chapter 2. and we can see then this here, the arrival of the everlasting gospel, the arriving of the third angel's message, is the story of the fall itself that happens after the Sabbath. And probably happens 7 years after creation, but that's just a guess. But symbolically, that would be significant if it was. We just have no way of proving it. So we've looked at the flood, and we've seen that we can have this, wherever it is here, we can have this reform line. Now, I'm not so settled on this reform line as such. That is, I don't know, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are they the empowerment of the first angel? And the reason why I would say that, the first angel arrives is that man's going to live to be 120 years old. Or 120 years is left. So it's not having to do with how long people live as individuals, but how much time there's going to be left. Now, let's look at the symbol. What is the significance of it being Genesis 6:3?
Half of the 126 symbolically.
And a symbol of Pentecost,
Yes.
right? So the 6th day of the 3rd month. Okay, and then we're going to see that Noah in that year, 510 BC, he's going to be called. And so that would be a formalization. That is, you need a person, Miller, Jeff, John the Baptist, somebody, who's going to be called to give that first message. And that's going to be Noah. So it's not a period of time, really. I mean, it might be a bit of a period of time when God says that to when Noah's called. But Noah is chosen 120 years before the flood. And he's going to be preaching, but he's going to have added to him Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And that's going to be 20 years after he's called, right? So 20 years after he's called, he's going to have Japheth, and then 2 years after that, 22 years after that, after he's called, he's going to have Shem, right? 2 years after Japheth. So that's a symbol. And then we have Ham. So we have 3 of them. Now, can we say that there is a divine symbol in Shem, Ham, and Japheth being connected with the empowerment of the first angel's message?
Well, in the first angel's message, you have the 3 steps seen within it.
Yeah.
Fear God, give him glory. The hour of his judgment has come.
Okay.
So you have 3 there within the first one.
Yeah. And it's also a 3-1 combination because you have Noah and then Shem and Ham and Japheth. Right?
Kind of represents 3 angels and the other angel.
Right. And we also saw that with the raven and the 3 doves. Or the 3 times the dove is sent out. So we see these types of illustrations, and to understand, because to deal with, and I don't know how much time we have, we don't have any time. But when we look at the flood itself, I think we can also put it on a line as well, but we haven't done that. So the flood year, the year that the flood occurs, would be an expansion of this waymark. Oops, this waymark here, right? The door of the ark closes, but it's expanded by looking at a reform line, and that is the reform line of the earth being covered with water, right? And then it recovering. So it's typifying the whole line. That is, every waymark typifies the entire line in some aspect of it. Even if it's focused upon, we could look at the call of Noah and say, well, that's a waymark, and we could probably see a reform line in that, in and of itself. But this reform line here, the reform line of the flood, the 120 years, it's sensible to look at it this way. But I'm not saying that it has to be this way. Now, the building of the ark would be this visual sign, and so they begin to build the ark. That's the arrival of the second angel's message. And I'm not saying that Noah didn't start the ark in some way, but once he has Shem, Ham, and Japheth, he now has a little bit more help. And it's going to take a long time to build the ark. So how much preparatory work was done initially before the ark was built, and how long it took to do different things, we could only guess. But we know that it's a process. But then we're going to see that the ark is finished. And when the ark is finished, then the animals are going to come in. And we could see that that would be the formalization and the empowerment of the building of the ark. The building of the ark, to me, must be the second angel's message. Because we know also that the second angel's message is connected with the building of the temple, correct?
We also have the second angel arrive the first day of the first month, and then it's empowered on the first day of the fifth month. So you have 120 connected.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the 120. So remember, 120 is also connected to Pentecost. And remember, in our line, we had this zoomed in waymark, and that's the way that I'm starting to understand what happened with, October 13th, 2018. Because we try to say, well, what waymark, what line is it? Because we said it was the midnight cry, but it was a zoom in to the PBM. We were looking at the prediction before midnight, and it was a zoom in to one of those waymarks. And it had within it now the waymark that I believe that it is in Millerite history is the Pentecost letter. Because as I look at 2017 and 2018 as Pentecost, it began in 2017 with the proclamation that July 18th was the prediction before midnight. And I did that on September 23rd, 2017, 777 days before November 9th. And so this is going to give us the ability, as we start to look at this, it's going to give us the ability to recognize our lines and how we can zoom into our line and understand the different waymarks. So what we're going to do on Sunday, because that's the next time we will have this study, is we're going to look into that a little bit more as we start to move into what happens after the flood. So we're going to try to understand that history from the flood to the time of Abram. That's what we're going to try to do next week. But we'll still be finishing off this flood story and then just looking at what happens afterwards. So any final comments before we close with prayer?
I'm just wondering, how you went with the pattern of the candlestick.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how relevant that may be in the exploration of all of these symbols. I mean, all of these waymarks and the zooming in. Do we use that as a pattern? That seven?
Yes.
Seven.
Yeah, I use it as a pattern all the time. I don't always mention it, but here we have the call of Noah. On the other branch, the opposite branch, we have the call of the animals. Right?
It seems to be a great tool for being able to make sense of the waymarks, not just making sense, but actually helping establish those other waymarks.
Yeah, I would agree, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth, I say that they're there to help build the ark, and the other branch of that candlestick is the finishing of the ark, right? And then, of course, this is all about the building of the ark. So this flood one, the center of the chiasm is the cross. It's the purpose. And so this is really, when I say this is the flood, we could probably say that this is the ark. This is Noah's ark that's being built. And we can use this and compare this to the buildings of the temple the 3 decrees, all these different things, we start to see that this second angel, its arrival, becomes this pivotal aspect within a line, and that the branches on the other sides reflect each other as a mirror. Right?
Yes.
So,
yes,
so the
I'm
candlestick
seeing
is,
that.
yeah. And they just happen to be that way. Once we set out these lines, we start to see, well, that's actually what's happening. But we didn't really think about that at first. But we've had the branch candlestick since 2016, that we were looking at it in this way. But we didn't have enough information to really understand how it related to all the lines and all of the waymarks. And you can see what is a reform line? What is it all about? Because it's preceded by darkness. So what is a reform line?
God moving to bring light into that darkness.
Right, it's light. And the branch candlestick, what does it do?
Well, it's light.
Light, cast light.
Brings light, and it's perfect light. It's 7 branches. This is God's truth unfolding throughout history in this very specific pattern that he has set up to bring light to mankind, both on the cosmic line and within each waymark of the cosmic line, in which within each waymark, which has a reform line, with each reform line in that waymark, and also within each of those reform lines themselves. And it comes down to the individual level, and sometimes to individual events in our lives that come down to this line. And this is all God's light coming to us through his word, through revelation, through him working through history in the proclamation of a message, which all began with God speaking into existence this universe, God saying, let there be light, in response to darkness. So it becomes a very profound way of understanding history and understanding the events and understanding prophecy and understanding the stories of the Bible. So it's just this powerful tool that's been given to us. Now, we say line upon line. This is what God has given this movement, right? That this line upon line is these reform lines, because that's how we sort of started this in understanding the lines. But can we see that really the center of this is really all about the cross, and that the cross is really just the revelation of Jesus Christ in history? And that when we see Christ standing in the midst of the candlesticks, in the midst of the 7 churches in Revelation chapter 1, when we see this, John's revelation of Christ, that it is this pattern, that it's not some arbitrary series of events that occur, that they're all about this branch candlestick. They're all about God's truth, a progressive revelation. Okay, so thanks for that comment there. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you again for this study. And we pray for the rest of this week, the study tomorrow night, the study Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Mountain Time that Dwight will give. We pray for all of the studies that are coming up, and for the Sabbath, that it will be a blessing. Help us to understand your truth, to study individually. May your angels watch over us today. May you care for us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.